Right. Hi, I'm Frank, as people have explained, Paul. You may remember me from such talks as Intro to Angular, back when it was still, fashionable, or anyone used it. Angular 2 is coming out, which is a bit like React, so I think it's going to be really popular among certain programmers when it does. Oh, and Intro to JavaScript build tools. I think that was mostly because Paul asked me to, and he was too lazy to look it up himself. So had me write a talk about it, which I guess is fair enough.
I'm that lazy, I organise a group so everybody else can tell me stuff. It's just delegating. Yeah.
That's the hashtag lazy web. That's good. It's good. But today I'm doing a more philosophical talk, and I'm hoping to convince you all by the end of it that code is for humans and content for machines. Now, to help me illustrate my points, I'm going to enlist some personas or personae. Personae. It's really just agile speak for fictional end users, right? So I'm going to start with the first one, which is contemporary Frank, who technically isn't fictional. That's me, but a lot of what we're going to see is going to be his fault, so I think it's very important that we include him in this list of personas or personae. Our proper first sort of fictional user is going to be future Frank. Yeah, I mean, his face is all droopy and stuff, but he's pretty buff, Got to work towards something. That's future Frank. How old do you think he is? What do you reckon?
You look older in that photo.
But that's the idea. It's future Frank,
I see,
right?
You're older, but you're
He's
Sorry.
no, 5 years from now. Do you reckon?
Your wife likes this?
I don't know yet. We'll find out. It's future Frank. Anyway, future Frank has, as a persona, has terrible vision, but he's got great contact lenses. But he's often too lazy to put them in. Also, his attention span is shorter than the plot script to Mad Max Fury Road. Has anyone here not seen Mad Max Fury Road? Okay. I won't spoil it for you.
You already have.
Sorry. Actually, I had a different version of this. I was trying to explain this joke to Hayden a little while ago. I said, oh yeah, I've got this joke about attention span, but it escapes me now. And Hayden thought that was the joke. And maybe that would have been a better joke. Maybe I should have stayed with that one, yeah. Anyway, so that's future Frank, one of our personas. And then we have poor coworker as our second persona. He's not literally poor. He's just, poor in the sense that he's going to have to deal with a lot of contemporary Frank's shit. Let's say. Code, I've got written down here, code. Well, okay. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is code. We all know what we mean by code. We don't mean hand signals or ixnays, whatnot. We mean talking to machines. And when I was young, back in my day, low-level coding was a common thing. We used to do that. You'd have an instruction set for a particular processing architecture, and you would write that using assembly, right? If anyone remembers that, here's a little bit of assembly for you. There's some nice stuff. Honestly, I have no idea what this does, but I used to write this stuff. This isn't mine, but there you go. It's an instruction set for one particular processor, central processing architecture, and you don't get much more closer to the metal than that. Yeah. Everyone know who that is? Not even. You're hip enough to know. Anyway, Craig Federighi, Apple Senior Vice President for Software Architecture. Oh. They released graphics driver called Metal to replace OpenGL that they used to use. And he's a pretty unmetal person, but it's metal. So it's funny. So there you go. Okay, so there we are. We have assembly code, which is pretty low level, but we've already made allowances for humans. In the form of mnemonics. I mean, you can see a lot of stuff there that isn't zeros and ones, and that's because it's really hard for humans to write stuff with just zeros and ones. And that's okay, because our assembler takes care of our assembly code and turns it into actual machine code. So that's really powerful, right? Because we get directly into the instruction set from the processor. We can say, all right, open that gate and let that bit in and whatnot. But it's only for one type of architecture. So that particular one was 8086 assembly. But if you want to write for slightly different architectures, we have to write different with a different instruction set. And that's, so that means we have to repeat ourselves many times over, and that's not great. Future Frank doesn't like doing that. Contemporary Frank and past Frank didn't like doing that, to be fair. Plus, it's an awful lot of code for seemingly simple tasks, such as responding to a button click or heaven forfend mouse movement in assembly is a lot of effort. So to overcome this, we're going to have to go a little higher. And now we've arrived at interpreted and compiled languages. I actually was going to do, when I first wrote this, I had a lot of slides, a lot of notes for slides. I was going to do a slide for a low-level adventurer, in role-playing games, and then a high-level adventurer, same guy with more gear and this and that. But I was at basically one slide per sentence, and I was like, turn this down a little bit. Anyway, we've got our interpreted and compiled languages, and Future Frank and poor coworker love it. It's great. But we have done it for ourselves, for us humans, right? To save us time and to handle the common tasks that we do all the time in everything that we program without having to start from scratch every single time, because that's a bit silly. And not just starting from scratch, but doing it over for the different types of things that we want to target, right? But programming languages are lefty, liberal, wishy-washy bundles of forgiveness, where do you put braces? White space, colons, semicolons, case. Well, most of them don't even care. Some of them do, but most of them are whatever. And you can do the same things often in many, many different ways. You can do it in one file, you can do it in 100 files, and let's face it, our compiler or interpreter doesn't care. To them, it's all the same. They strip all that crap out and put it into machine code. And then it runs shiny machine code, either in memory if it's our interpreter, or on disk if it's our compiler. So, in other words, even with our high-level languages, we have very little standards in the sense of what we need to do. And poor coworker gets very unhappy when contemporary Frank keeps changing his coding style because something else pleases him more visually. Contemporary Frank can be an arse like that, it has to be said. His visual aesthetic proclivities are a harsh mistress. So we have to do one better and then impose some order onto that. And to go one higher than our high-level programming languages, we have frameworks, right? They'll keep us in line. I just noticed that the color of frameworks is different red than the... Can you see that? Not so much. On my screen it stands out. That means nothing to anyone. Sorry, it's this Photoshop file done in with great due diligence and care is using different reds. Never mind. Frameworks, right. So poor coworker has a few things to say about frameworks. What makes a good framework? Well, firstly, it means you don't have to reinvent the wheel constantly for what you do. It abstracts the common task, the things that you do over and over again. And it prescribes a standard way of doing these things. So, poor coworker, contemporary Frank, and future Frank are all on the same page, assuming that the documentation for the framework they use still exists when they're working on it, but that's something else, But as a result, in theory, it makes everyone's life easier and saves everyone time. Incidentally, if your framework that you're using fails on any of those points, then it might be worth reconsidering it. And don't forget that includes the time it takes for all of your people that working on it learning said framework. So a lot of frameworks come out, super cool, do a lot of really cool things, but you can spend an awful lot of time learning how they work, and so you end up spending a lot of time on that. I have a note here saying entering conclusion. But we can see we've come from machine code, which is already a human, has human allowances in it, to, sorry, machine code doesn't. From machine code to assembly, because allowing for humans and our crappy memories and our laziness. And we've gone from that to higher level programming languages, so we can target multiple architectures and multiple processes, to frameworks, because we don't want to do the same thing over and over again, and we want to get stuck in really easily and quickly into the nitty-gritty things. And we've done it because we don't want to repeat ourselves, and we like things to be easy. All in the name of humans. Again, the machines don't care. So I wanted to round off the section about code with some examples that have bitten me in the backside, or that I've encountered in the wild, that could have been avoided if we'd remembered a bit more that we write code for us. For us, but importantly for our co-workers and our future selves. If we just wrote it for us, my argument would still hold up, because future Frank was one of my arguments. Yes, I forgot about that. There we are. So we've got some gotchas. Here was one that caught me out, I think just a couple of years ago. We've got like just a list, an ordered list, with some stuff, and a button allows us to reorder it. And we hold the data in a model, just an array of objects there. And when you click the button, we order the array of objects, and then we re-render. And I looked at this. This is a simplified example from the code that I had, which was massive. And it's actually easier to spot why this works here and why. And you look at this, some of you will look at this and go, well, that makes perfect sense, and think, why did that stump Frank? He's clearly an idiot. And you'd probably be right. But here's the thing, I looked at this. We have just rearranged the model, and then we are redrawing it. But at no point are we actually emptying the container. So I was wondering, well, why don't we end up with duplicates? If we never take them out, where did they come from? Oh, sorry, where did they go? Why did they disappear? Does anyone know why? No. Excellent. See, got me as well. Well, it's because we're appending the same DOM node that already exists. This doesn't append doesn't automatically clone it. It just takes it from where it was and appends it into our container. But at the time I looked at it and went like, what? Why does this work? But it does. And it's obvious when you think about it. Here's one that I particularly like. Hidden magic. It's one that's perhaps particularly poignant to JavaScript. So we have an array, simple array of a few strings. We call the slice method on it with argument 3. We would expect to be returned the item that is at index 3 on that, which would be a D. Instead, we get back the array with a 3 appended. What the fuck? Right? Again, this is a simplified example, but this is why. Someone overwrote the slice function. Cool, we can do that in JavaScript, not a problem. This is an extremely contrived example, obviously. But you can override absolutely anything in JavaScript. Well, almost anything. You can't override operators. I've tried. Which is probably for the best. But that's what I mean by magic. A lot of frameworks employ an awful lot of magic. And unless you know the documentation very well, you don't always know that it's happening. And you can really look at it and go, why is that happening? In this case, we wouldn't do anything like that. We put a new method somewhere on array prototype, for example, that said, well, it would be called push and it already exists, but never mind that. But we have a lot of, this is especially true with magic getters and setters that you have in a lot of frameworks, which intercept the getting or the setting of a property and do weird shit to it. Sometimes serialize it, sometimes take a date, a perfectly good string date, and cast it into a JavaScript date object. Now, in my experience, you should never, ever use JavaScript date objects, because whenever you do, and you think, I'm only doing it for this one thing, I don't need a date library just to do this one thing, you're almost certainly wrong. Every single fucking time it called me. Am I allowed to swear, by the way?
Yeah,
Is it too
not?
late? Yeah, too late. I'm sorry.
But I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, that's all right. I ended up, the last project I worked on, I used a pretty great Moment.js library. The one before that, I just casted it into ISO strings and did substring on it when I just needed one part of it. It's bad, but it worked. Here's a really cool one, isn't so well illustrated. I have to point out, so this is a cut down, but this is from an actual framework. I won't name it because that'll be churlish. We do like a class thing. We've got, I mean, JavaScript hasn't got classes, but that doesn't stop every framework under the sun trying to force them in there. But the cool thing, the weird thing here is that function, toDetail.html, you notice it starts with an open comment and closes the comment right at the end. And everything in between it is a comment. Now, my highlighter, being a sort of down-to-earth kind of sort, doesn't get that stuff and just tries to do with it. But if I look at that in Sublime, all I have is a function that does absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. But what the framework does, it calls toString on that function, and JavaScript retains all the comments in the toString function. So now, they're having overwritten that toString. They now strip out the function definition part and only keep what's in between the comments, and then take that as their value.
Is this React?
No.
It isn't, no?
No. This is, I won't.
Precursor.
No, this is, and the reason these guys have done it, I mean, it's clever, don't get me wrong, it's clever, but it's also insane. But the reason they've done it is because they didn't want to write all of those things in quotes and have a plus at the end. Multiple lines with plus, because concatenating strings makes you look weak. Interestingly, I have it on good authority that Angular, this is how Angular does its direct injection. For those who've done Angular, when you write a control or whatever, you say, well, I'm depending on all of these various things. And they're arguments to a function. And that function doesn't have the name of those arguments, only the value. Except you cast it to string, and suddenly you have that, all of that in the string. It's interesting. And this came about because there was an example that a colleague showed me where another framework that we work with, sadly still at work, did a really obscure test to test this out, the way they did that, to see whether it would support toStringing a function, because there are some situations where it doesn't. I'm not familiar of those, but well, anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a sidetrack. And so by now we've seen that code and everything we do in code is to make our lives as humans easier. And more often than not, we fail. We fail spectacularly. So let's talk about content. So when we talk about content, we mean the text in our HTML pages, the words in our apps, and essentially everything else on the internet that isn't an instruction to the consuming device, although content can, I guess, be an instruction to the consumer, more than 50%, whether it's click here, or this is what you should do with your life, or here's how to lose weight, or other things. I won't get into it. For that, for this segment, we're also going to look at certain personas or personae again, and we're going to bring back Future Frank to examine some of these things, because he's great at being problematic and causing problems. And we're also going to bring back future poor coworker. Now, he's since gone blind, literally blind with rage, working with contemporary Frank. He's all shaken up. His nerves are a mess, but he's in a quiet place now. But he still likes to consume content. And I meant to say early on when I started with the personas, if you thought that I had a really biased gender representation, that was only because I'm going to do really horrible things to them at any rate and say horrible things about them, and didn't feel necessary to really spread that out too much. So yeah, quiet place. I want to talk about signal versus noise. So anyone remember the old radios where you had to tune into particular frequencies, generally by a dial? Looking around here, some of you are old enough, others not, to remember that. So, in order to get to the signal, you had generally to work yourself through a lot of noise, and you just keep dying, unless you remember the specific address in hertz, and the display of the hertz was pretty accurate. You still have to do an awful lot of dialing and this and that. So those are the two ways to find your signal in the noise, is just try until you get to it, or knowing in advance where to find it. So the signal is what we're after, but it's the noise we have to go through, and it's very easy to lose it. So content on the internet is exactly the same. And you have to, bear with me for a second. For every one piece of real useful information on the internet, there are 999 pieces of ill-informed hate incitement, low-resolution pictures with grammatically poor words in an impact font family, inane status updates, cute cat pictures, celebrity quotes in brackets George Takei, celebrity misquotes, out-of-context news bites with hundreds of "yeah, too right" comments, video reshares without any words as to why the video might be of interest to me, poorly targeted adverts, precisely targeted adverts about products I bought last week and are now useless, misuses of the words literally and figuratively, stray apostrophes in brackets plurals, missing apostrophes, non-research pseudoscience articles, clickbait headlines, freemium game clones with no shred of original thought, self-discovery quizzes to widen your shallow identity pool, porn star name generators, band name generators, and out-of-date JavaScript framework blog articles. Right, so that's a lot of content, right? And we have to store it. A lot of noise, very little signal. And the noise, along with the content, or the signal I should say, is immortalized in ones and zeros on an insane number of hard disk and solid state drives, and ever-growing number of data centers all around the globe. Why should we care? Storage is cheap, and capitalism, yay, ensures that the more we want something, the better we come at manufacturing it, the cheaper it becomes to manufacturing it. And so it's a self-fulfilling industry, really. It's great. We just keep adding disks, and we invent cheaper ways of manufacturing those disks. And every once in a while, we even remember to invent a better storage way. But, storage isn't a real problem. It's finding the useful information, finding the real poignant bit among the morass of soul-destroying propaganda and inanity. Can anyone find the piece of information in this that is different? Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, you're good. Should have made it subtler. Damn it. Maybe I'm looking too close. Anyway, so again, why do we care that there is so much crap in our soup? Well, because at some point in, let's say, the last few hundred years, us humans went from a species that evolved by being physically better adapted to our environment, to evolving by tapping into a growing and shared pool of knowledge. So knowledge has become more important to us than ever. And we've realized this, luckily, and we've made strides to make it more accessible to more people, a vast number of people. In fact, the internet is such an endeavor, and it's a successful one. It's done great. But the internet is now so saturated with a content, the good and the bad kind, it's harder than ever to find the crucial, factually correct pieces. So, like a human dialing through all of the frequencies of the noise just to find at the signals and stopping at each time there is a bit of signal to see whether it is in fact the one we're after, because you can't immediately tell. Sometimes it's very similar. You know, we now have to sift through all the information on the internet until we get to the piece that we actually want and that we are interested in. Now that's no task that a single human can do. So we've invented machines to do it for us. Makes sense, right?
I'd just like to point out that I'm not old enough to know what PSB is.
Where's PSB?
At the bottom.
Something banned, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got to be. Yeah.
Oh, there. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Public service, I think, isn't it?
Oh,
Public
yeah,
service
yeah,
broadcasting. Yeah, nice, yeah. That's a lot of bands there. Even my radio only had 2, so. So we've invented machines to make sense of it, and this is a bit nostalgic. So first we had directories like Yahoo and Alta Vista, where you would manually submit. Well, okay, they weren't the first, but they're some of among the better known ones of the time. And you would submit your information about your piece of knowledge that you had carefully and deliberately put on the internet into them. Make sure you submitted it to the right category, with a poignant description about what your site did and why it was relevant to that industry. And then generally you had humans who would go through these submissions and yay or nay them, right? Because they had volunteered to do this. So, but not everyone could submit themselves to every directory, and not every search that the end user would do would result in a great set of results. That's a terrible way of phrasing that. Would yield a good set of results from a search in a given directory. So we invented machines that would look at multiple directories, so meta search engines. I believe web crawler was one of the first ones. They didn't actually crawl that, well, I guess it crawled other directories and stuff. So cool, you type in your search and you look in several places and give you results. That's great. But that also still became unpractical. The whole process of us keeping up with an amount of information that we put out there became impractical, which is an interesting thought, right? So the output that we generated at some point overtook the amount of effort we could put into categorizing that output. I find that very interesting. But so now we became proactive. Our machines became proactive and started following links themselves. Google is the best known example of that, but it wasn't the first. So they go out, follow the links, and try and categorize things themselves. But now they have to understand the content, right? But that's not so bad. You know, we have browser titles, we have domain names, although, you know, geocities/categories. Well, there was already some categorization in there, you know. We can also look at the name, the name and description and keywords, meta tags, because they were around back then, and go, cool, that's what it's all about. We can understand that. You could even look at the H1 of the page, or, you know, count which phrases or words appeared the most. So our machines could make sense of the content that was out there. However, then came spammers. Sorry, internet marketers, who learned that they can play the search engine crawlers, the machines that we built to help ourselves. Of course they could, because you can make money with it, you know. And so in turn, our machines evolved and became better at discerning content from spam. And the battle continued, you know, and it rages farther and wider than ever, with an ever-growing arsenals of tools at each site's disposal. We expanded HTML and CSS specifications. We've created browser plugins and extensions, and then JavaScript, you know, and more. You know, there's many ways we could play it. So the battle between the machines that try and make sense of it and the humans that try and fuck with it continued and raged on. Anyone got any thought as to what that slide might be?
Is it a monkey? There's a Siri icon in there.
There is a Siri icon, yeah. So this finally brings us back to actually using our personas a little. So we've got Future Frank. He wants to find information. He relies on machines to find it for him. You know, he's lucky. He's done it since his contemporary Frank times. He's lucky because while he's too lazy to put his contact lenses in, Fembot Siri 4000 in the future listens to his vague, garbled, chaotic instructions that passes for searches and translates them into real words for advanced neural network brain facsimile powered by Google to feed through the universe of content that is out there and to display to him what he's looking for. So for future Frank, it works pretty well. But poor coworker, poor future coworker, if you remember, he went blind, and his nerves are shot, so he forsook mouse navigation for keyboard navigation. Still, he dictates his search to his computer, and the computer duly takes him to desired web page and is even kind enough to read it out aloud for him. This is called a screen reader. So, it just reads what it sees on the screen. But poor coworker is a power user of screen readers. He immediately presses the button that says, because he knows the introductory page he's going to is all fluff, he just wants the navigation, he just wants the links. So presses the button, just give me the links on that page, right? And this is what's read out to him. Not so useful, I could speak forever why you should never, ever use click here as your anchor text for anything, ever. But someone's already done it, and did it 3 years ago. It's a great article in Smashing Magazine. So he says it all already, right? So,
who is that by, Frank?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up, I'm afraid. So we've learned that we need to help machines get better at understanding our content. If only we had some sort of way to label it, tags to point out useful functional bits about our content, well, we have. That doesn't stop us from completely misusing it. Right. I meant for them to look exactly the same, but then I forgot to add the border style on the top one, so my apologies. But there's the thing, to a sighted user, the top looks exactly like a button, right? And what we have is a div, which holds no meaning beyond the fact that it holds no meaning, to a poor coworker screen reader, and the fact that we give it a class that is an abbreviation for button or whatever. And again, this is a little contrived because we probably wouldn't have that style right on there, especially if we already had a class called button, but whatever, just bear with me for that. So there is no inherent functionality in that button and nothing, but it will work if you hook it up with JavaScript. There's no reason why it wouldn't. But the exact same thing can be done, but just using the button element, which tells the screen reader, this is a button. So poor coworker hears, oh, that's a button, as opposed to text negative. Well, there you go. And that's a simple example. The button is always the simplest example, but it's the same. Some hold no meaning beyond the fact that their meaning is purely for presentational purposes or purely a scaffolding in a sense, like div and span. And others hold meaning and they tell the screen reader or other devices like the crawlers, the machines that look at our content and try and understand it, what it's all about. Selects, input, abbreviation, time, all of those things. There's a finite number, but there's a few.
I was just going to say the button element is also focusable.
Yeah, it's focusable. Yes, so poor coworker can actually tab through it. Yeah. Now, because the guy who wrote the web page probably disabled focus styles because they're ugly, still won't help him. But yeah, in theory it can. Right. So, the argument for placing special attention on our markup is, in the short term, to help future poor co-worker to make his life easier. But in the long run, to help guarantee the very survival of our race. And that's a big statement, I know. But I hope I've demonstrated that we need to be able to find the knowledge that we create so that we can continue to share it with everyone in order to keep learning from that and not keep reinventing ourselves like writing new frameworks all the time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why code is for humans and content is for machines. And that's you can look it all up there if you want to catch the links and read that smashing article. Any questions?
Do you promise to not pick up a new JavaScript framework soon then?
That's only because I just picked one up quite recently.
Right? When that's old in a month.
I promise I won't write one. How's that?
That's what which isn't so much a concept.
Yeah, just go ahead.
What do you think of semantic web RDF type definitions?
Of the semantic web, sorry?
I was thinking when you sort of lack towards the end of your slides and you're looking at kind of ways of tagging content in a sense. I was thinking, have you used or done much with RDF or other semantic web kind of?
Well, so HTML by its nature has semantics built into it. And in some places they are not sufficient. You know, if you, not so much for displaying content, but when it comes to rich applications. And then you start running out. And that's where you can look at ARIA attributes and other micro formats and ways of marking it up additionally. Yeah, but I think Hayden could talk a lot more about that still. But I think it's just important that we as developers look at the very basics and just do it right, straight there, and then add when we need to, as opposed to starting with, there is literally a CSS framework out there called Semantic UI, I believe. And it is the least semantic thing in it's terrible. There's no other way about it. Sorry, question over there.
Not actually sort of related, sort of perhaps question-wise, and sort of perhaps skips over the point of your presentation. But nonetheless, I saw a post by Facebook, I think it was this morning, how they've got this new screen reader technology, which using, I think I've seen these algorithms that Google have been working on and stuff, which can describe content that it's seeing. They've actually released a new beta version of the Facebook app, which like describes photos for blind people. It's a very select sort of beta process, which is just oddly related to the whole button description thing.
And it's interesting because that's what I mean. Our machines are getting better and better, but only because they have to, because we are terrible at making it right in the first place. You know, just a great alt attribute onto an image goes a long way towards describing it, and perhaps, but of course, Google can't trust it because our spammers will take advantage of it, so it has to try and know better, and it's this. It continues as this cycle. Additionally, like Google have just talked about, Google Inbox is coming out with a functionality where it understands the message and suggests answers that you can, well, not just predictive texting, predictive email answers. There's some pretty crazy stuff on there.
Have you seen the alt text bot on Twitter as well, which if you write a tweet with an image in it, and then you include alt, I think it's alt underscore text underscore bot, and it will reply with a description of the image, so it will automatically describe the image.
I have not, but
that's quite but I don't know whether that's a machine doing that or I think
or a sweatshop of people.
professional way.
I must say that as one of my pet peeves is people taking pictures of text and adding them to Twitter because they can't articulate what they want to say in 144 characters. And I think it's one of my list of things about inanities on the internet.
Well, they don't have alt text for images on Twitter, but now they've arbitrarily changed stars to hearts. So
yeah, which is really awkward for some things that I starred, which I really disliked, but I wanted to get back to later. Now apparently I heart them.
I was keeping my eye on known criminals, so I was starring stuff for them, and I was like, oh yeah, nice one.
Yeah, mine was just all porn, but you know. Okay, cool.
Thank you very much.
I think we're done.